Hello, Owls. This is week 5 ACT videos. This week we will be talking about line graphs. So 2 parts for today's lesson. First, we'll talk about strategy for line graph questions, and then we will do 3 practice passages with different types of line graphs. Line graphs on the Science ACT. They show up in 2 of the passage types. They show up in the data passages that are usually just some graphs, some tables, and you answer questions about the results. And they also show up in the research summary passage types. They are obviously not in the dueling scientist conflicting viewpoint passage because those are just text. Okay, line graphs are used for showing trends. So they're really good when you're looking at those to figure out, okay, is that line increasing? Is it decreasing? What is the trend that's being shown? And oftentimes they'll show change over time. And these are a really popular graph type on the ACT. You will see lots and lots of line graphs on the ACT, so it's a good one to practice. Okay, line graph strategy. It's pretty similar to our bar graph strategy. We recommend go straight to the questions. Do not waste time trying to read the passage first. Passage is full of all kinds of science things that I have never even heard of. They throw in all kinds of jargon just to confuse you and slow you down. So skip the passage, go straight to the questions. And try to group your questions. So say you find a question that asks about the figure 1 line graph. Find all of the other questions that also ask about figure 1 and do them all at the same time. That way you're more efficient, you're focused on one graph at a time and you're not flipping back and forth and getting confused. Okay, when you look at the line graph, these are the things that you should pay attention to. First, check out if there is a title. Title is also always important. And then look at the axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. X is horizontal, y is vertical. The x-axis will be the independent variable, so whatever they're changing, and the y-axis is the dependent variable, whatever they are measuring. Also make sure you pay attention to scales and units. Sometimes they count by 10, sometimes they count by 5, sometimes they count by millions. Pay attention to those numbers. They will have distractor answer choices that maybe just count by ones just to mess you up. And then if you have time, sometimes it helps me just to jot down a quick summary on the side of the graph saying like everything increases over time. Whatever helps you kind of remember what that graph is about. Don't spend a lot of time summarizing the graphs. Remember, Science ACT is very tight on time. Okay, and then lastly, make sure you're grouping them and answering all the questions about the first graph, then all the questions about the second graph, and then save for last any questions that either require you to read, they're not in the graphs, or that compare the graphs. Those are good to do at the very end. Okay, first thing I want you to do is try practice passage number 1. To get to practice passage 1, you'll click the link in the video description, open up the Jamboard, and that first slide of the Jamboard is first passage. Take 5 minutes, use that strategy, write all over the passage and answer the questions, and we will check the answers in 5 minutes. Good luck. All right, so it's been 5 minutes. Let's look at practice passage number 1 answers. To see the detailed answer key for practice passage 1, you can, sorry, I'm having some computer issues. You can go to the answer key document, which is linked in our description. We're going to go through answers for a couple of those questions for practice passage 1. So again, I'm not going to go through every single answer. If you want to see all of the answers, they are in the link in the description in the document that says answer key. We're just going to go through a couple that have to do with line graphs. All right, here is practice passage 1. Okay, let's look at the ones that have to do with figure 1 first. Figure 1, it's a pretty typical line graph. With line graphs, we want to pay attention to the keys. Usually there's going to be more than one line. ACT is printed in black and white, so they'll differentiate the lines by either one's dotted, one's solid, or they'll use shapes sometimes. Okay, let's find questions that have to do with figure 1. 7, nope, that's figure 3. 8, nope, figure 2. 9 is 2 plots. You want to save that for later, for the end after you've looked at all of the plots. 10, all right, 10 is about figure 1, so let's look at number 10. Let me grab my highlighter. Okay, number 10, according to figure 1, that's not a highlighter. According to figure 1, from 1999 to 2004, all right, let's look at figure 1, 1999 to 2004. So they're asking about the whole graph. How did the dry biomasses per plant for the 2 plots compare? Okay, so they're just asking, how did this biomass compare to this biomass? How did the 2 lines compare? The dry biomass per plant grown in CO2 concentration of 370 was, all right, so now they're asking basically, how do these 2 lines compare? Was the 370 line the same, greater, less than, or sometimes greater? Okay. Was this 370 line, this solid line, the same, greater, or less than? All right, it looks like this solid line was less than the entire time. So let's find which one says less than. H says always less than. All right, so H is our answer for number 10. Let's see if there are any other questions about figure 1. That one's figure 2. That one's figure 3. All right, so we've done our figure 1 questions. Now let's look at our figure 2 questions. I'll use a different highlighter color. Let's use blue. All right, figure 2 is this line graph above here. Pretty similar line graph. If you pay attention to the axes, just like this previous graph, we've got years on the bottom. And then over here on the y-axis, looks like they're looking at percent of the original plants surviving. Okay, so what percent was surviving each year? Let's see which ones have to do with figure 2. 7, no, that's figure 3. 8 asks about this one. 8, according to figure 2, which plot had the higher percent of original plants surviving at the end of the study? Okay, so we're looking at the end. Which one had more surviving? Our y-axis says surviving. Which one had more surviving? Looks like it's this dotted line. This one's higher at the end. Okay, so the dotted line is the elevated or 570 parts per million. Okay, let's look at our answer choices. Elevated, so it's either going to be H or J. Okay, and they're asking by what difference. Okay, so how much more were these surviving than this one? It looks like it's about 1 tick mark more. When you look over here on the axis, it's about 1 tick mark apart. Okay, so now we need to figure out what these tick marks are counting by. They're not counting by ones, right? See, they tried to trick you there by saying 1%. But we're going 20 and then 4 ticks to 40. So that means we're counting by fives. Be 25, 30, 35, 40. We're counting by fives, 1 tick mark. That's going to be about 7%. 7 is closest to 5. Okay, so looks like here J is your correct answer. This one was more by about 5, so 7%. Okay, so 8 should be J. Let's see if we see any other ones that go with figure 2 while we're on figure 2. 9 asks about both, so you would save that to the end. We already did 10. 11. Based on figure 2, what percent of the plants grown with a concentration of 370 had died by 2003? So they gave us all the information to know which part of the graph we're looking at. We're on figure 2. We're looking at the 370 parts per million. So that'll be the solid line. Okay, and we're looking at 2003 as the year. So they're asking about this data point right here. Solid line 2003. Okay, and they're asking what percent of them had died. Okay, now that's tricky because this graph shows survivors. Okay, so we'll have to find the amount that survived and then subtract from 100% to find the ones that died. Okay, so if we've got survivors in 2003 is about 40%. So they tried to trick us and they made that one of the answer choices. The ones that died would be 100% minus the survivors. So 100 minus 40 is 60. 11 should be D. Okay. We won't talk about this one because this one has to do with the pie chart and we're not worrying about pie charts this week. All right. So those are line charts for practice number 1.